and Amy. My name's Jerry Milani. I'm one of the faculty trainers based out of Melbourne. So I have my class. There are 4 other classes here. So there's nearly 100 people already in this session. So I guess a formal good evening and welcome to obviously staff and students for our industry guest speaker event for this evening. So we have quite an interesting topic for this evening, specifically about the unit you're studying, which is networking for success. So to discuss this in more detail, I have a lot of pleasure in introducing our industry guest speaker, Mr. Gary Peng, who will be discussing this topic in a lot more detail. So in this talk, Gary will be focusing on various topics related to, as I've been told, rethinking networking, high quality connections, respectful inquiry, and listening behaviours. So Gary will bring his insights and experience on how you as students can leverage your strengths and work on your weaknesses in order to achieve your goals and succeed in your own individual working careers. So through this talk, Gary aims to inspire and motivate you to develop a positive and proactive mindset, take ownership of your own personal and professional growth, and be open to learning new opportunities through creativity. So a big warm welcome from me and from the faculty to our good friend Gary. Welcome, sir.
Thank you so much, Jerry.
That's all
Thanks
good.
for the introductions and sorry.
So all yours, my friend. Just a reminder before we kick off, everybody, just a reminder we've got over 100 participants here. Please make sure your microphones are off. If you do have any questions or anything that you would like to contribute, maybe it's probably better suited towards the end of the presentation if time permits. You can maybe put a message in the chat. And if time does actually permit, we'll address those towards the end. So without further ado, I'm going to shut up and I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to hand over to Gary Peng. Welcome, Gary, right. And the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. Once again, good evening, everyone. Good evening, Jerry. Thanks for having me join this session this evening. And like Jerry was saying, I was a former ILSC sessional trainer back in Melbourne as well, actually. Okay. So cool. That's where I met Adam, and I actually spoke to Adam sort of just recently as I came back to Australia. So and here I am just a week later. So wow. I'm very happy to be here, very happy to take part in this session, and hopefully I could, my experiences can add some value to, all of you students who are I suppose, either in the process of getting into industry or have had already some industry experience, either in your home country or in Australia. So, yeah, a little bit about myself. So I was actually in training and education for a number of years, up until 2019. And that's where I was also doing sessional, teaching at ILSC. In business, marketing, leadership, and etc. And then, but for the last 3 years and a bit, I have been living abroad. I was based in Japan the last 3 years and a bit, and that's actually where I sort of started my own business. And currently, I do that full time. So I have my own e-commerce business, and I've moved back to Australia approximately 3 weeks ago. And I guess, it's been a very exciting process for me. And networking is definitely a huge part of, starting your own business or building your own business. And, I think this particular aspect of networking, which I was involved in, between Japan and Australia and the UK and EU and America, I think it would probably, affect all of you who are international students, I suppose, right? Because you might be working with a number of different countries when you are involved in any sort of business. So like Jerry already mentioned, I'm going to try break things into 3 parts, with the first section being sort of re-understanding what networking is. The second section being high quality connections. What are high quality connections, and how do we sort of, foster, create, and keep high quality connections? And the last section being respectful inquiry and listening behaviors when you are sort of either expanding, creating, or nurturing your networks. All right. And I think Jerry also mentioned that if you do have any questions, please leave it either to the end of the presentation, or we can also, I think, I might have like a short intermission between each part. There are 3 parts, just so that if you have any ideas in your head, you're not going to sort of forget them by the end of the talk. So I'm not sure if this is a good idea, Jerry, but sorry, Jerry, I think your microphone is
Okay, sorry about that. You think a trainer would get that right? Yeah, it probably best to leave things at the end. What I suggest to students is maybe pop messages, pop something in the chat, and then we can maybe monitor that as a speaker and then also as the trainers. And if time permits, at the end, it'll probably be better that we do it then. Otherwise, it could get quite unwieldy and we could blow out in time as well. I'm mindful of your time, of course. Yeah.
No worries. Sounds good.
Excellent.
All right, so I'll get right into it then. So the first thing I'm going to talk about today is obviously rethink networking. What is networking? So I think the word networking, when we think about networking, right, a lot of people think that it's probably something quite arduous, quite taxing, quite a difficult process or sort of an engagement to get into. So it's important to think of networking as something simple, like cultivating social capital or making friends, for instance. Now, it is important because, if you have a brilliant vision, it's likely to fall flat if the person advocating the vision, yourself, is not well known, liked, or respected. So we obviously need to network in order to get our vision out there. So what I like to do is I like to think of networking as an opportunity to conversate with interesting people. And we could do that like every day, everywhere, at any time, right? So what I like to share is maybe a recent story of a networking event which I took part in. So this would have been not too long ago. I took part in a digital marketing networking event. Because that's obviously something that is related to the business which I'm involved in. And my goal was just to kind of, listen to people's stories and try just to enjoy their stories and get to know people, as, as someone who was curious about, people's stories and journeys. So, I met a particular individual who had a very interesting story. And this person was involved in an industry which is very close to all of us, So, if I asked you guys, what sort of what did you watch growing up as kids, right? So there are probably a number of brands which would instantly come to mind. And, if you had to think about what brands they are, right, it's probably, some big names such as Disney or Marvel, for instance. And this particular individual, he was working on a large project for one of the latest films that had been coming out. And I just felt that it was such a fascinating story that he was responsible for one of the biggest sort of movie premieres that was coming out. And it's something that's very close to heart for every person because, he was basically what he was doing was he was behind the latest Dungeons and Dragons movie. He was one of the visual arts directors. He was one of the visual arts leads of the latest Dungeons and Dragons movie. Obviously, I've got nothing to do with visual arts. I've got nothing to do with his work, but it was just very fascinating to me because he was involved with a lot of stuff was coming out from Disney Plus, from Marvel, and then they're all things that were very close to my heart. And it's something that I think he used to connect with, lots of people. So, it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter which country you come from. You have probably at some point in your life watched Disney or Marvel or, any sort of, like big studio hits. So it's something that you could sort of relate to. Just going back to rethinking networking. So one of the things I think that is important when you are networking is obviously the ability to listen, but not only listen, but listen deeply. And that's something that we often, we're not naturally sort of built to listen deeply. Usually, when we are listening to someone, we're basically focused on what our response is going to be. We're focused on sort of what we want to share. We're focused on sort of our own experiences. But listen deeply is sort of you really need to kind of switch off your inner voice in order to listen deeply. So, and that is very hard to do. It takes a lot of practice because obviously, if someone is speaking to you, right, you'll find points where you sort of have shared experiences or shared context or shared knowledge, and that will encourage you to want to kind of speak or respond and share your story. And sometimes we get really into kind of wanting to share our own experiences that we forget to listen or, let alone listen deeply. So one of the key things about networking and understanding networking, it's really, you need to listen deeply from the get-go. And it is something which takes, a lot of practice, but, conscientiously telling yourself to switch off the inner voice and just focus on listening deeply will help engage the other person and foster a better sort of connection or relationship, which kind of brings us to the next point I want to talk about, which is high quality connections. And this is actually something I sort of got into reading about recently, and you really kind of touched based on a lot of things I had been doing over the past 3 years. And what high quality connections is described as being when we experience vitality, positive regard, and sort of mutual understanding. This is when high quality connection occurs. And if you ever feel energized by a particular interaction, if both yourself and the other person involved feel the respect that they deserve, if you feel liked, if you feel cared for during the interaction, and the final important factor being when both parties are open to being influenced by one another, this is when you experience something called high quality connection. And so it's definitely just something all of us have experienced at different points in time, but it's not something that we conscientiously probably think about, right? So you often might take those for granted, but if you think about it, it could be your favorite, I don't know, could be your favorite colleague, your favorite teacher, it could be your best friend. They're likely to be your high quality connections that you have right now within your networks. So now, thinking about high quality connections, I thought about the importance of when I applied this to sort of what I've been doing the last few years, the importance of high quality connections to the work that I've been doing is the HQCs, which I've built obviously in Japan, in Australia, and in the UK, where a lot of my businesses were sort of taking part in. And it was really important, I suppose, that I have those high quality connections because they provided information which could, get me support in times of crisis, for instance. I mean, for instance, the COVID and the Ukraine war, it had a drastic impact on e-commerce, across the world. So in times of crisis, I've had to sort of, I had the support of some of my high quality connections, which provided a lot of help. So a lot, help in the form of information, help in the form of support, help in the form of in my case, thankfully this didn't happen, but sometimes help in the form of monetary help. So having quality connections can really be a game changer. Or in my case, it certainly helped me sort of sustain through COVID and the Ukraine war, which had a huge impact on sort of the logistics of business, as you guys would know it. For instance, my business, the UK and the EU was one of my main markets when the Ukraine war hit. So I lost 98% of my customers overnight. But I was lucky enough to have a high quality connection in the UK who offered me support in the form of, maybe what you could do is, why don't you ship over a pallet to the UK and we can distribute for you locally, right? So that's an example. I had that option. I didn't have to offer it, thankfully, because logistics sort of recovered within the next 2 to 3 weeks. So, I was very fortunate. But having that option, in a worst case scenario, had a longer impact, for instance, a month, 2 month, 3 month and onwards, would have been a huge game changer. So anyways, going back to HQC, so this is just one example of how HQC can be very helpful. But yeah, going back to what HQC is. So some of the characteristics of HQCs is, number one, I mentioned earlier about sort of experiencing vitality and experiencing sort of this feeling energized by the interaction, right? And you know that when that happens because you walk away from the conversation feeling really, really good about yourself, right? And the interaction we've just had. Perhaps you were able to share something and the other party had been listening deeply to what you were saying, and what you had said had some sort of positive impact or influence towards the other party. So, and that is when you create these HQCs. And in the process of doing that, you want to make sure you're doing that respectfully. You want to make sure you're obviously, present. You're being genuine. You're being supportive, as we've been discussing, and you want to be affirming. And the most important thing is you want to be descriptive rather than evaluative. So what that actually means is you want to share details rather than judge the experience or the situation. So for instance, if there is a conflict at work, you want to describe the situation, then try and gain feedbacks rather than pin the blame on somebody and then ask for the other person to side with you. So that's just one example of engaging, or the engagement part of HQCs. The second thing with HQCs is you want to be a task enabler, right? So you want to help people appreciate the significance of their work, and you want to also sort of advocate on their behalf. So if they're doing something that is quite valuable, that you find value in, you want to help advocate for them. So it's not only, acknowledging what they're doing, but also sort of, in a way, you're vouching for what they're doing, right? And it's something that you believe in yourself, of course. You can't vouch for someone if you don't truly believe what they're doing. And the next thing is obviously fostering trust. And we foster trust by sharing valuable information. We foster trust by using inclusive language. So inclusive language such as we, us. And probably the most important thing about trust is if you lose trust, it's very, very, very difficult to rebuild trust. So what you want to be doing is that you don't lose the trust that you gain, right? So, and to keep trust, you need to be, honestly, some of the things we've discussed about. You need to be respectful. You need to be honest. You need to be truthful, and you need to continue to share valuable information. And the last thing about HQCs is sort of maintaining these HQCs. So how do we maintain these HQCs? And one of the key thing about HQCs is it's not all just work and business, right? And maintaining high quality connections is just like maintaining any sort of friendships or relationships you have, right, that you currently have. So you need to do stuff together for fun, right? You need to have shared hobbies, you need to have shared interests, and it could be anything. Like for example, I have several high quality connections in Japan, because I was living in Japan the last 3 years. So we do a lot of non-work activities together for fun. So one of the things we do is we would go out for cycling. We would play tennis. We would go for drinks. In Japan, there's something called izakaya, which is kind of like a popular sort of get together after work, and you kind of have like beer and bit of meat. So yeah, we do that, and we might also do some snowboarding, because there's amazing snow during the winter seasons. So it's something that you want to make sure that you're also engaging in with your high quality connection, your HQCs, right? Because if you're just doing all work and there's no fun, then that HQC is not going to be very sustainable, because you got to have common points of connections outside of work. So I think that's one of the main important factors about HQCs. The last thing with high quality connections, I guess I want to talk about, is feedbacks. So when you're maintaining these high quality connections, right, feedbacks is obviously very important. You want to be providing feedbacks, but you also at the same time you have to understand what kind of feedbacks you're offering. So the two main group of feedbacks you want to be providing are, number one is improvement feedbacks. So these are sort of constructive criticisms in a sense, right? So the goal of these feedbacks is to help your sort of high quality connection improve. And this also kind of goes into your ability to influence them, and them being open to you having some influence on their ability to work, for instance. And the second feedback you want to be able to provide is recognition feedbacks. And recognition feedbacks is kind of like acknowledgement feedbacks in a way. So recognition feedbacks is basically recognizing that the effort they put in to sort of achieve what they have achieved. Recognition feedback is sort of recognizing sort of the progress that they've made. And these two types of feedbacks are extremely important, and it goes back to sort of being affirming, being positive, and being when I say positive, being a positive reinforcement to their progress and their journey. And these two feedbacks are extremely important in maintaining high quality connections. At the end of the day, if you sustaining high quality connections do take a lot of time, and it takes a lot of effort. So, not everyone has the time to have a dozen high quality connections. You might have a few at most, in fact, just because they do take a lot of time. But in order to keep those sustained, these high quality connections, you want to make sure that you're constantly engaged enough with their journey, and you're able to provide sort of relevant and helpful, improvement and recognition feedbacks at the same time. Now, which brings us to the last point, which is respectful inquiry. So this is a bit more detailed, look at sort of how do we network, right? So some of this might have been already covered in your course, I believe, but I'm going to just go through some of the key points, in my experiences. So one of the first things when it comes to respectful inquiry is you want to be asking open questions, and you want to be listening attentively to the responses. So this goes back to point one, rethinking networking, right, which talks about deep listening. So the only thing we're adding here is you are asking open questions, which allows, which activates, which enables the other person to speak in detail about their experiences, their stories, their journey. And what you want to do is engage in deep listening, which is also known as, which is also listening attentively to the response. Of course, you have to ask the right questions, and you have to ask open questions in order to activate and allow for the other person to tell you and to be descriptive about their stories and their journey. So, I assume everyone has some idea of what an open question is, right? So for instance, if you're asking a question like, God, I'm trying to think of an example of a closed question versus an open question.
I just put an open question in the chat there for you,
all right,
Gary.
Sorry. I'll have a look actually for the chat.
No, I'll actually read it out to you while I'm doing it. So
sure.
it just says, Gary, in your opinion, how valuable are business cards in the networking process? Do you want to answer that?
Yeah, that's a great open question, that Jerry has just asked. So how valuable are business cards in networking situations? Right. It's something that, like if you ask that question, the other person will actually have to think about, sort of the process. It's an experiential sort of process that they have to think about. It's something that probably done many times, and something that you actually have to sort of create a response for. And to answer Jerry's question, how useful are business cards? I think business cards are, they can be very useful in sort of formal and orchestrated and planned set out networking activities and events, which is sort of the classic, sort of when you think about networking, right? The classic sort of networking, meetings and the classic sort of networking sort of events. I think they can be extremely useful. But at the same time, networking, a lot of times also there are a lot of tools that we can use outside of that, So, and that is a really good question Jerry has asked, because recently I just came back to Australia, for instance, just 3 weeks ago, and I've been in the process of making some sort of, business materials for my business, and yeah, I made some business cards, obviously, but at the same time, I made a lot of sort of, brand-based brochures. I made a lot of stickers, which I absolutely love. And the reason for that is I can apply a lot of these stickers to, I can apply them to all my tools, to all my portable devices. I can use them in my office. I can give them out to people who are interested in my business or my business product. So going back to the question, business cards are extremely useful, when you are in networking activities and events. But outside of that, there are obviously a peripheral of materials and resources that you could use to, really sort of market or advertise your business. And I find that, probably just over the last week or so, that depending on what business you do, and part of my business focuses on the idea of sort of having fun as well. And stickers really kind of help when it comes to that. So yeah, but anyway, so what Jerry just did was ask an open question. So a closed question would probably be something like, do you have a business card? Right. To which you can only provide a simple yes or no answer. And it would not be a very sort of fascinating response that you could sort of, elicit if you had asked something as simple as, do you have a business card, or have you got a business card? Yeah, so anyway, so going back to respectful inquiry, so asking open questions and listening attentively to the response. And Jerry just said that, and I probably spent way too long answering that question.
It's okay.
But that's when it's a good question. So the next point I want to talk about is good open-ended questions that engage your speaking partner and lead to better high-quality connections, which is exactly what happened. So I just went on talking for way too long, but this helped a lot in creating and fostering a high quality connection. So essentially, that's what you need to do, right? So ask good questions, and they will basically allow for more discussions and closer HQCs. Why are open questions important? So it signals that you think that someone is important. So if you're not asking open questions in general, the person who you're speaking to might think that you don't think it's important. You don't think what they have to share is important. and hence it could be a quick end to the conversation. One of the other things about respectful inquiries is you want to try to be perspective takers. So you want to try and think from their shoes. Even though you're asking open questions, you want to make sure you're asking sort of sensitive questions. You don't want to be asking questions which may be insensitive to their particular work or their particular industry, for instance. Yeah, so that's respectful inquiry. So the last thing in the third session I want to talk about is listening behaviors. So which has been kind of covered for the most part. So we talked about obviously listening deeply, listening attentively, paying attention, and also briefly touched on sort of being descriptive and holding judgments. So what that means is you don't want to be you don't want to focus on judging the story. What you want to do is you want to focus on listening deeply to the story. And it's really quite easy for us to, as human beings, to sort of judge someone else's experience or story. It's something that we might do if we have sort of guarded tendencies, but it's important to sort of try and conscientiously tell yourself to drop the judgments or hold the judgments and try to understand someone from their perspective. And I find that to be a very sort of difficult process. Obviously not for myself as well. It's a developing process, but for a lot of people sort of I spoke to, it's very difficult to sort of hold judgments, and something that you really have to conscientiously be aware of. It's a lot of it is like self-awareness, constantly sort of make sure that you're not sort of assessing someone's experience or you're sort of evaluating someone's experiences. Rather, you want to be just listening and focusing on what their story is and where it's really coming from. And one of the final listening behaviors is reflecting and clarifying. So clarification is very important. And I think, clarification is one of the reasons why we have a Q&A session at each webinars that you might have taken part of or seminars, because you might have questions which needs to be clarified. You could have understandings which are not, you could have certain understandings that you're not sure about that you want to clarify. You've had some time to reflect on what's being discussed, and then you figured out that, there's something that you're not clear about which needs to be clarified. So same thing with listening behaviors. You want to make sure that the information that you're getting is being clarified. And, not only does that allow you to sort of have a more, I guess, more complete understanding of someone else when you're networking, but it also allows you to show that you're actively engaged in listening, right? You're constantly checking for understanding. You're constantly making sure that your understanding is aligned with what they're actually speaking about. Because at times, some people, we could, form the habit of just, acknowledging to everything that someone is saying, but then 10 minutes later, you have no idea what they've just talked about, or, it just hasn't really sort of interested you at all because you weren't really listening or you weren't really that interested. So,
Gary, just on that, sorry to interrupt you, because I'm mindful of your time and everyone else's time. It's actually a question that I've actually raised in here, and it's one of the things that I brought up with my class. And the question that I actually, I have a bit of an expression in business, which it says something like, it's better to have, when talking about a business opportunity, better for a fast no than a slow yes. And what I mean by that is, not wasting people's time. So the question is, how do you politely tell someone that you meet in a business setting that you don't see any value in an ongoing business relationship, but do it respectfully? How do you handle that situation?
Right. Yeah. Thanks, Joe. Once again, that's a very good question. So it's definitely a situation that I'm not gonna lie, Jerry, it's something that I struggle with, and I'm still in the process of probably learning myself. And it's probably something that we all face. You know, you kind of get stuck in a situation and you find it really difficult to say no. Um, I think the only thing I can add to this, you know, which you probably will probably have more information on this, Jerry, yourself, is that I try and find a way to leave the situation seamlessly as much as I can. So obviously, you know, you would hope that someone else sort of enters the conversation, which provides you an opportunity to go grab a coffee, get a drink, go to the loo, for instance. But
Yeah.
really, it's really a difficult situation to be in, especially if the other person is very chatty and you just meeting someone for the first time. So it's very difficult to kind of give a stern no. But I mean, you know, if time is really an issue and you can't, you know, you can't waste your time all day, obviously, and you need to move on, then you simply just say it as it is. You know, there's
Be
nothing wrong
honest, huh?
with, yeah, there's nothing wrong with telling someone is that, you know, you're kind of, I mean, obviously you don't want to be rude about it, but
No,
if you
no, of course not.
can, yeah, if you can, obviously, you know, just go grab a coffee, or I don't know, go get another drink, or go to the loo if you have to. But I
Yeah.
guess yeah. So
There's
so
no
Gary,
easy
I'm not
answer,
sure if
right?
I able to add. Sorry.
No, I know there's no easy answer, right? But
Yeah,
it
yeah,
is. I
absolutely
think
not.
it's important that I genuinely believe that if you're honest with people and respectful, they appreciate the fact that you're not wasting their time, and you're giving them an opportunity to maybe meet with people who can actually do business with them. Now, just so we all know, guys, it's now 7:11. There's
Yeah,
a couple of questions. One in particular the students raised.
yeah,
We actually only
sure.
sort of not. We're gonna pay you an appearance fee, Gary. I tell you what. So we actually booked you to 7:15. Are you are we in a great hurry to leave?
Oh no, I'm fine. Yeah, I'm
No.
just in the
Okay.
office and everyone's gone. So it's
Oh,
all
that's
right.
cool.
Yeah,
But I'm also
yeah.
mindful of the other teachers and their schedules and the
No
other
worries. Yeah,
other
not a
students as
problem.
well.
Sure, no worries.
I've
Yeah,
got a question from Marcello here. It says,
yeah.
"Hello, Gary. I have a question. Do you believe that people underestimate the power of social media like Instagram and TikTok when it
Yeah.
comes to leveraging their business and overestimate the power of the business card? For example, if I need a travel consultant and it transforms his Instagram page into a
Mm.
showcase, I feel more willing to close a deal with him." You want to comment on social media and
Uh,
networking?
yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really good question, Marcello, because you know, social media is obviously something extremely powerful in today's world, especially when we think about, you know, sort of the mainstream audience of who you're working with. And social media is something that is probably very close to a lot of millennials and Gen Z. And millennials and Gen Z as consumption audiences or target markets make up for a huge marketplace, you know. And so your question was underestimate the power of social media. So I think social media is definitely a very powerful tool if you can sort of leverage that to your business. And it comes down also, like for me, it really comes down to what your main target audience is. Like for myself, a huge market. You know, one of my biggest sort of target audiences are probably millennials, and you know, and definitely I've used social media, uh, you know, quite a lot, especially in the first year when I was growing the platform, and just to sort of engage a lot of the audience, especially during COVID as well. So I find that during COVID, you know, social media had even more power as people were staying home more and in the office less. So, you know, like stuff like, you know, TikTok and Instagram, you know, once again, it depends on really what you do. And, you know, if your business has sort of huge appeal on like social media platforms, with some industries, it's just sort of more easier to leverage social media than others. But yeah, like your question is, for example, if I need a travel consultant and transforms this Instagram page into a showcase film of, yeah, I think, you know, once again, like if you find someone who's got a very powerful social media brand, it's definitely like you're more inclined to, you know, I guess have more sort of trust in their brand. And that this is where like social media is very powerful, because obviously you can build a very kind of powerful sort of reputation if you have a strong social media, such as like, TikTok and Instagram, for instance. The only thing I want to say is I think depending on the scale of your business and how closely your business is tied up with sort of, e-commerce, right? Business cards can be more impactful. If you're working on a small business and you're connecting with a lot of people locally, business cards can be very, very powerful. However, if you're working sort of globally, in e-commerce, for instance, and social media, it's definitely like a primary source of sort of marketing that you would use. So hopefully I answered the question, or kind of answered the question.
No, you've done well. You've done well. There is one more question at the bottom of the screen there. Can you see that? It says from Jonathan, what is the most effective method to include a call to action in a pitch?
Call to action in a pitch. What is the most effective method to include a call to action in a pitch? That's a good question. I'm just trying to think of the last time I've had to do this. Most effective method to include a call to action. Jonathan, can I just sort of clarify your question a bit? It's like when you say call to action in a pitch, you mean that you're expecting a response from the other person, right, in your kind of sales pitch, or that's my understanding of the question. Would that be correct?
Yes. I want to know how can create these connections. How is the best way to create that connection?
Right. Yeah. I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier about sort of you want to be an enabler. You want to be sort of a task enabler. So in your pitch, you want to use words which enables a response, right? So you want to use words which enables them to either maybe send you a connect via LinkedIn, or maybe send you a DM on Instagram, for instance, depending on what kind of business you're involved in or what kind of connection it is. But you want to use very enabling language in your pitch, so that will allow for follow-up actions and steps and sort of connections to be sort of created and fostered and such. So you want to be using positive, enabling, affirming words. I think that would be something that, I'm not sure how well I've answered that question, because it's not something I've done in recent memory, to be honest. But I don't know, Jerry, do you have something perhaps a little more?
Well, no, it's interesting you raised that. I was just saying, I guess it's that one of the things that I was flipping back over my notes, and I have been taking notes. I guess it's that whole idea of creating that vitality and actually judging genuine interest. In terms of a call to action, I would suggest maybe providing some level of specific offer and creating urgency around that. So if someone's genuinely interested, say, please, if you can get back to me by a certain time, because I can't actually make this available to everybody, and I would love this to happen for you now. So creating urgency is often a key in that process, I would say, Jonathan. Yeah. Now, I was just going to say, we're kind of at our ceiling in terms of time, and I don't want to. And there are people that are genuinely interested here, so I don't want to wind it up. But equally, I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So, can I ask my fellow trainers? Do any of my fellow trainers have any questions or comments they would like to make on behalf of their teams? Maybe if they're a little bit shy about speaking in this forum. I usually wait for 10 seconds before I wind up. My guys know this. So we're all pretty okay. I think we've kind of gotten to a point now where, unless anyone's got any follow-up questions, and if you do have some follow-up questions, I'm more than happy to pose them to Gary, and maybe I can liaise with Gary, and we can get maybe put together a little bit of a Q&A as a follow-up. I'm happy to commit to actually doing the work on that, so I'm not going to put you on the spot, Gary. But yeah, so if there's no other questions, I guess all that's really left for me to say is, on behalf of ILSC Education Group and Greystone College, a huge thank you for Gary for providing your precious time for our class. There's been over 135 students in attendance. I personally have had great value in your presentation and enjoyed the fact that you've done that. So a real debt of gratitude to you for making yourself available. For our trainers as well, who are taking time out of their schedules, I thank you very much for your attendance and your support of the networking event. It's something that I think is that it really does add value to your educational journey with the school. So thank you so much for your attendance, but for obviously most of all, Gary, a debt of gratitude for make yourself available. So a big round
Not
of
a problem at
applause
all.
for me.
Thank you so much for having me again, Jerry. It's been
Not a
pleasure.
problem. Yeah, it's great. Okay, guys. So on that note, I guess it's only the one thing left to say is thank you again for your attendance. And I guess it's back to your main rooms with your trainer in order to progress with, I guess, your own personal networking event so you can complete your assessment. All right, guys. On that note, I guess I'll call it to a close. Thanks again for everyone for attendance. Thank you to the trainers, and thank you once again, first and foremost, to Gary. Thank you. Good night, guys.
Thanks again.
Okay, see you later. Bye-bye.